The views expressed on Skeptically Speaking are not necessarily the views of this station, its affiliates, sponsors, or advertisers.
Bring it on! The skeptics await your letter. Your call, tweet, homing, pigeon, whatever. Desiree Shell gonna raise a little hell, metaphorically that is. 'Cause we're skeptically speaking.
Hello and welcome to Skeptically Speaking. I'm your host, Desiree Shell. This week we're on the hunt for legendary monsters. We're joined by Benjamin Radford, author of the book Tracking the Chupacabra, the vampire beast in fact, fiction, and folklore. But first we'll take a lighter look at a homegrown creature, the Canadian lake monster Ogopogo. Enjoy! I'm here with Kennedy Goodkey, actor, writer, and producer of the film The Beast of Bottomless Lake. Welcome back, Kennedy.
Hey, Desiree. Thanks for having me back.
So this is actually the second time you've been on the show to talk about this movie. And that was episode number 23, right after I had met you at the, I believe we were calling it the unofficial pre-screening you held at the amazing meeting.
Yes. Yeah, we were still doing audience tests back then at TAM 7?
A couple of years ago. So
I remember it was in Vegas. That's all that's clear to me.
That is all that's important at this point. So we're pre-recording this episode so that I can attend this year's The Amazing Meeting, also known as TAM. When this show airs, it will actually be in full swing. That is magic.
Oh, I love living in the future.
So now TAM is the largest skeptical gathering in the world. So why exactly did you hold the pre-screening there?
Well, because a large portion of our presumed demographic would be the critical thinking crowd. Specifically because the film largely revolves around a lake monster in Okanagan, the Ogopogo.
Well, now I obviously loved the movie, or else I wouldn't have you on twice. So tell us a bit about the film.
Essentially, it's a comedic update of Moby Dick with the Ogopogo as the great white whale. And it's very Canadian, I think, in a lot of ways, though we don't wave the flag or, nobody is a hockey player or drinks maple syrup or anything like that. But it's a very Canadian film, I think, and it's also kind of geekily science-y as well. Although most of the scientists in it are bad scientists.
So maybe tell us a bit about the Ogopogo backstory for anybody not living in Canada.
Well, the shortest version is that it's Canada's equivalent of the Loch Ness Monster. I think there is some weight behind the argument to say that it is probably the second most famous lake monster in the world. And if it's not second, then it's third behind Champ.
Who's Champ?
Champ is in Lake Champlain. And, honestly, they're all interchangeable. They're goat-headed serpents in the lake. Maybe a plesiosaur. So yeah, and the Ogopogo happens to be Canada's equivalent, and it's based on native legends that predate the coming of us white folk here to the west coast of Canada.
So how was that backstory used in the film?
We do touch on the native traditions, and about 3 different points. We have one of the structural conceits of the film sort of mirrors Moby Dick, and may be the only retelling of Moby Dick that actually does mimic this. In the original, about every second chapter, after about the 40th or I think 44th, is an essay on something to do with whaling. So in ours, we have these documentary moments where an expert comes in and talks about something to do with the Ogopogo. One of them is native as a chief. One of them is a sheriff who's an archiver of Ogopogo lore, and one of his favorite tellings sort of reflects some of the original native legends. And then one of our main characters is a native guide.
So now, are the characters sort of evidence-based investigators, or do they already believe in Ogopogo?
The leader of the expedition is clearly not evidence-based. He is quite certain that it exists. He believes he saw it when he was a kid, and he is going out to find the Ogopogo. They've got a week-long expedition, and he's positive that he's going to find it in this period of time. because of course it exists. And some of the other characters on the team are more skeptical, for lack of a better term. So it varies.
Well, what I really loved about the film was showing how the town had fully exploited the legend. Lots of Ogopogo themed kitsch and store names and such. So did you add to that for the film, or was that really the way it was?
For the most part, we went out and found the real thing. And you really can go through Kelowna or Penticton or Vernon, the three main cities on Lake Okanagan. And sure enough, there are statues of the Ogopogo, and every tourist place you can buy T-shirts or stuffed animals or even candy based on the Ogopogo. And sure enough, there's stores. There's a Ogopogo Automotive. Doesn't appear in the film, but there is in Kelowna an Ogopogo Automotive. And there are other businesses that also have borrowed the name.
So you didn't have to Ogopogo it up at all for those scenes? Not
at all. It's all the real thing.
So what's that like then, filming in that kind of environment?
It was delightful, really. I mean, there was something magical about being able to come to a small town. Kelowna's not that small, actually, but let's just, for the sake of saying it's not a huge metropolis, let's call it a small town. Coming to a small town and saying, hey, we want to make a film about your city and about this legend that surrounds it. And the people of the area just really were very giving and wanted to have it happen. I mean, a number of films have been shot in the Kelowna area, including the zombie film Fido, which had actually just been shooting when we went there. So being able to go to Kelowna and say, hey, we want to shoot this film about you here was really special. And we got a lot of support from the community. And when we went back a couple of years later, just this past summer, and went to the Okanagan Film Festival, naturally the house was packed. And before the screening, we got to say some words, and I got up and said, hey, this is a bit cliche, but it has to be said. But, this is our movie. We made this movie, but this is your movie. And, yeah, I mean, I guess I was playing to the crowd a bit, but at the same time, they knew it, too. Like, they owned it, and the place went wild. So, yeah, it was an excellent experience, going both ways. We were able to give back by bringing them a film which they loved.
And this film has already won awards, correct?
It has. It won Best Feature at the Mississauga Independent Film Festival, and it won People's Choice Award at the Okanagan Film Festival, and it got honorable mention at Mockfest in LA.
And I assume part of that was the fantastic cast of which you were one?
Yes, I think that was. I think that we have some really talented people in the film, including David Nickel from Stargate Atlantis playing our lead. And I think part of it was that we as a cast really, it's a very ensemble piece, and we really bonded and had a great time together. So, I think that sort of comes across on film, that we were really having a great time working together, even though practically every character on screen hates everyone else on screen at some point in the film.
Well, it's out on DVD now.
The 15th of July is our DVD release date. Yes, so right in the middle of TAM, the DVD is out there. And I think there's actually going to be some copies floating around TAM, like not just the pre-screeners like there were when we met, but, the real, actual, honest-to-God, with featurettes and commentaries. We've got to talk about the commentary.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think there should be a couple of copies at the very least available at TAM.
Well, tell me about the commentary, because I have heard behind-the-scenes stories
about
this.
Scenes? Yeah, no, this is one of the things that I'm most excited about this, because, and you touched on this when we first talked about this. You said, well, there's some distinctly non-skeptical aspects to this film, and absolutely, I own that. And there is some willfully bad science in the film. And I wanted to sort of make some amends to that, but I also wanted to make it really like an accessible lesson, like an accessible educational something or other. So we did a commentary with David Nichol, who plays the main scientist in the film. He's the ringmaster in the commentary. And then our science advisor, whose job for the most part in the making of the film was to say, oh God, you guys, this is bad science. Though he did drag us into reality a few times. And then skepticism's civil shepherd, Daniel Loxton, is the third voice in that commentary. And we have two commentaries. The other has myself and the director. And honestly, my favorite commentary is the one that I'm not in. It's a lot of fun, and it touches on so many different aspects of critical thinking and the relationship of science to society and so forth. And it's a really fun commentary, and it also helps clarify some of the places where we diverged from what is empirically sound.
That was diplomatically put, sir.
Well, I'm only protecting my own feelings.
So where can people find out more then? July 15th, you say?
July 15th. If people happen to not be going to TAM and they happen to be in Vancouver, we are having a DVD release party at the Denman Theatre, including a screening of the film, and there will be copies of the film, the DVD, available there. But you can also go to our website at www.provostpictures.com, and there is a button there, a page on the website where you can order copies of the film to have them delivered to your door.
I will be picking up my copy at TAM, and then I will have to hustle you to autograph it at some point.
All right, that's a deal.
Thanks very much for being here, Kennedy.
Hey, my pleasure. We'll see you again soon.
And we'll be right back with Benjamin Radford, author of Tracking the Chupacabra, the vampire beast in fact, fiction, and folklore, after this.
Skeptically Speaking wants you to question everything. To be a part of the discussion, call and record your question on our listener question line at Speak 73101. That's 773-257-3101. Long-distance charges may apply. Sunday nights at 6 Mountain Time, join our Ustream chat room to listen and ask questions as we record interviews live. Just click the Listen Online button at skepticallyspeaking.com. You can also email your questions and comments to live@skepticallyspeaking.com, or if you're on Twitter, tweet us at Skeptical Radio. To find out where Skeptically Speaking airs near you, to listen to past episodes, or download the weekly podcast, check out our website at skepticallyspeaking.com. While you're there, follow the links to connect with us on our Facebook page, our Twitter feed, or to subscribe to the show in iTunes. And now, back to the show.
I'm here with Benjamin Radford. He's a columnist and the deputy editor for Skeptical Inquirer magazine, co-host of the Monster Talk podcast, and one of the world's few scientific paranormal investigators. He's written over 500 articles on topics like urban legends, mass hysteria, mysterious creatures, and media criticism. His new book is Tracking the Chupacabra, the vampire beast in fact, fiction, and folklore. Welcome back to the show, Ben.
Thanks. Good to be on.
Now, we definitely want you to tell us all about the Chupacabra, but first, tell us a bit about your work as a whole.
I'm one of the research fellows at the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, formerly the Committee for the Scientific Investigations of Claims of the Paranormal. I'm the deputy editor of Skeptical Inquirer magazine and have been for 12 years now. And in addition to my research there, I do investigations into all manner of weirdness, from ghosts to chupacabras to crop circles and miracles and bizarre weirdness along those lines.
You call yourself a scientific paranormal investigator, so what does that mean exactly?
Well, it means that I follow as closely as I can the scientific methodologies, which distinguishes my work from, frankly, most of the paranormal investigators out there. Of course, there are exceptions such as Joe Nichol and Massimo Polidoro and Richard Wiseman and others of the skeptical bent. But certainly, the work that we do is distinguished from the vast majority of ghost hunters and amateur paranormal investigators because we do use critical thinking and scientific methodologies when we're investigating these claims. Many people oftentimes think of the paranormal or the mysterious as things that are somehow outside the realm of science or things that can't be examined or understood through science. And of course, that's not true at all. I mean, the science is a way of finding out. It's a process, and it's the best one that humanity has ever devised. And of course, the same methods that are used to investigate, for example, homicides or to investigate the world around us in astronomy or medicine, those same techniques and methodologies can also be applied to mysterious events and phenomena and creatures. So that's sort of what I do, and that's why I make an effort to distinguish my work as being scientific.
When people meet you, do they assume that they're going to get sort of the same thing as something they would see on TV, like TV's Ghost Hunters?
I do get that on occasion. Because I'm 6 foot tall and bald, on occasion I've been mistaken for one of the guys on the Ghost Hunters crew, which annoys me to no end. But I either get comparisons to that or the X-Files is the other one. And of course, there are a couple similarities with the work I do in the X-Files, except of course for the witty banter, the attractive co-investigator, the office, the black helicopters, really everything else other than that, yes.
Right. Well, before we talk about the specifics of the investigation itself, I'd actually like to get some background, because this was one of the longest investigations that you've ever taken on. So why the Chupacabra? What got you interested in that in the first place?
¿Por qué el Chupacabra? Well, the reason for the Chupacabra, there's a couple. One of them is that I have a background in researching unknown creatures and monsters. In, I think, 2005, Joe Nickel and I co-authored a book called Lake Monster Mysteries, investigating the world's most mysterious creatures. And in my more recent book called Scientific Paranormal Investigation, I include chapters on investigating lake monsters and Chupacabra and other things as well. So I already had a background in investigating strange and mysterious creatures along the lines of, Bigfoot and Mothman, things like that. So part of me is like, well, hey, this is kind of cool. The other part, another reason was that unlike Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, for example, the Chupacabra is a vampire. It sucks blood. I'm thinking, this is cool. We have this weird, it's probably the world's second and best known vampire after Dracula,
right,
to be honest with you, that many people really believe in. I mean, this is one thing that often gets lost in talking about the Chupacabra, is that there are many people who sincerely and genuinely believe that the Chupacabra exists and has been attacking both people and livestock in some cases, for decades. So it's important to remember to many people, this is a very real thing. And so, again, between having the vampire element and this unexplained element, and the other part was, of course, that especially when I began looking into it, I recognized that the Chupacabra really only dated back to the mid-'90s, which is odd because, if you look at the history of Bigfoot, for example, that really only dates back in a real way to about the 50s, and the Loch Ness Monster only dates back to about the 1930s. However, the Chupacabra is a far more recent creature, and it's known worldwide. It's probably the world's third best known monster after Bigfoot and Nessie, and yet nobody had really sunk their teeth into this mystery. Speaking
of sinking your teeth into something, so what does Chupacabra mean exactly?
Chupacabra means goat sucker in Spanish, and it's named that because goats are allegedly its favorite prey. Although it's not just goats, everything from pigs, sheep, cattle, stray dogs, basically any livestock or small animal at some point or another has probably been claimed to have been a victim of the Chupacabra. There's actually at least two different people who claim to have coined the word Chupacabra in 1995. The most likely is a comedian by the name of Silvio Perez, who was and I think still is, a talk show host in San Juan, Puerto Rico.
There are actually quite a few kinds of chupacabras, are there not, according to legend?
According to legend is a good follow-up. It was curious because when I was researching it, I kept coming across these wildly disparate descriptions of the chupacabra. There's just, some people say it has wings, some people say it has a tail. It's just really all over the map. And what I recognized was that if you go to the original Chupacabra, the very first image that people talked about as the Chupacabra, you have this bipedal beast about 3 to 5 feet tall with large red or black alien-type eyes, sort of like the wraparound that you see in alien grays in ufology, for example. It had a very distinctive row of spikes down its back. It had long limbs, usually long claws, fingers, and things like that. Again, this was occasionally said to have wings, but essentially that was the form that it was taking. It had a sort of a large head, oval head, for example. And this was the first and basically the biggest and best known version of the Chupacabra, and it was known all over the world. It was originally cited by a woman named Madeline Tolentino in the town of Canóvanas, Puerto Rico, outside of San Juan, in August of 1995, and that essentially became the template for all the other Chupacabra sightings until about 2000. And then an interesting thing happened was that those Chupacabra sightings essentially petered off. And the second version of the Chupacabra, a second completely disparate form, emerged right around 2004. And in this case, you had canids. You had animals from the canid family, which would include dogs, foxes, coyotes, hounds, things like that. And these were small animals, quadrupeds, obviously. They usually looked a lot like dogs, except for the fact that they usually had little or no hair, maybe just a little scruff down the back. Sometimes their teeth were a little more prominent, but essentially they looked like hairless dogs or foxes or coyotes. And in many cases, that's what DNA results showed them to be. But it was fascinating because for the Chupacabra believers, they said, oh my God, there's this weird creature. It's sucking the blood out of these animals. And for many of them, especially the ones who really got behind it in the mid and late 1990s, there was this, oh my God, any day now we're going to find the creature. We're going to find it. We're going to find it. And they never found it until 2004, when you start finding these dead animals, primarily in Texas and elsewhere in the Southwest, where you have this completely unrelated creature. I mean, these two forms cannot be reconciled. They cannot be the same thing. There's not the spikes down the back. There's not the shape of the head. And then you sort of have a third sort of catch-all category that includes everything from dried skates, which is an ocean-type animal, to just sort of any weird thing. So you actually have this progression from 1995 of Chupacabra meaning a very, very specific creature with specific characteristics. And you have this broadening, this gradual broadening of the definition of Chupacabra and what the public thought it was until the present day.
We have what I consider to be a fantastic email question from Shirley.
In the book, you call the Chupacabra the third best-known monster in the world. How do you measure monster awareness?
That was the question that I actually got from my publisher. And they're like, can we call it the world's third best-known creature? I'm like, well, I guess. And then, how do I quantify this? I have to admit that it was a somewhat unscientific thing because, it's really hard to poll everybody in the world to find out, what do you know the best of? Frankly, it actually came down, to be honest with you, to a Google search. Somebody, I believe, at the University of New Mexico Press did a Google search for Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabra, and based on those rankings. In fact, frankly, there was some question as to whether we could call it the second best known monster because it's actually eclipsed the Loch Ness Monster. But just to be on the safe side, just to not piss off the Nessie fans, I went for the third.
I think that's a good call, sir.
Thank you.
You're listening to Skeptically Speaking. My guest is Benjamin Radford, managing editor of Skeptical Inquirer magazine, and the author of Tracking the Chupacabra, the Vampire Beast in Fact, Fiction, and Folklore. So you mentioned there's important bits of the stories that don't match up. There's the whole idea that the Chupacabra's victims are completely drained of their blood.
Yes, that's one of the primary characteristics, if not the primary characteristics, of the alleged Chupacabra victims. The main characteristic of the animal itself, certainly if you're talking about the original Chupacabra, is the spikes down the back. That is essentially consistent throughout almost all of the eyewitnesses. When you're talking about the animals it leaves behind, again, the signature characteristic is allegedly carcasses that have been completely drained of blood. That's one of the main things. And so, like, when I was tackling the mystery, I basically had this big Chupacabra enchilada, if you will. And then so I had this big monstrous wrap-up of weirdness and disparate descriptions and eyewitness accounts and these carcasses that have been found, just all these different things. And so what I did, as I do with all my mysteries, is you sort of break it down into smaller mysteries and you try to analyze what's really going on here. And so quickly I realized that part of the mystery was going to be, how do we reconcile these completely different versions of the Chupacabra that emerged originally in 95 and again in about 10 years later? And then the second part of the mystery is, well, if there is not, in fact, a Chupacabra, and I didn't go into this investigation assuming that there was or there wasn't, but if there is not, then the question is, well, what is draining the blood out of these creatures? And so that was sort of a type 2 second-tier mystery.
But it's fairly easy for an untrained observer to think that a corpse has been sucked dry of blood, is it not?
It is, and I came across this over and over and over again in my research of Chupacabra reports. And let me be clear about this, because a lot of people have this misconception that if you read a lot of websites and magazine articles and in some cases book entries on it, they will give these laundry lists of Chupacabra reports and Chupacabra sightings. And it's important to recognize that these are not the same thing. A Chupacabra sighting is exactly what it sounds like. An eyewitness says, I saw X. I saw something that looked like this original thing that Madeline Tolentino described, the spikes on the back, the alien eyes, this and that. Or they found, a dead, hairless canid creature. However, the vast majority of so-called Chupacabra sightings are actually, in fact, reports that have no mention of the Chupacabra at all. All they're saying is they found a dead animal. And I should add, the assumption is that that dead animal had been completely drained of blood, and therefore it qualified as a Chupacabra victim. So it's a little misleading to sort of, there's hundreds and hundreds of Chupacabra, sightings. No. They're not. There's not that many. Most of them are simply someone seeing a dead chicken, goat, what have you, and saying, "Oh my God, this thing must have been drained of blood." And when I was researching this over and over and over again, particularly in a book called Chupacabras and Other Mysteries by a researcher named Scott Corrales, who frankly was actually the first person to write significantly about the Chupacabra. Unfortunately, he refused to be interviewed for my book. But over and over again in his book, he made dozens and dozens of references to stories of animals that had been drained of blood, and yet almost invariably there was no follow-up. There's no one saying, and this was confirmed by. And a veterinarian saw this. A trained veterinary pathologist saw this. It's always this assumption, and this sort of gets into the science aspect of it, is when I was trying to understand how can all these people think that the animals that they're finding have been drained blood when in fact they haven't been. That's when I actually interviewed, for example, a pathologist here at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, and I talked to her at length, and it's really fascinating. This sort of gets into CSI forensic stuff, and the simple fact of the matter is that the average person cannot simply determine blood loss, and certainly not vampirism, from looking at a creature. This is a characteristic that you have to be trained pathologist to do. You actually have to open up the animals. You can't just look at them.
So have any corpses of animals supposedly killed by the Chupacabra ever been autopsied by a veterinarian or a zoologist or anything of that sort?
Very rarely. And in the cases when they have, particularly in Puerto Rico, the answer was, drum roll please, there is blood present. Over and over again, this was the question I kept coming up to when I would investigate these Chupacabra sightings and reports. I kept waiting for someone to say, and this was confirmed by, and this autopsy was done by, blah, blah, blah. And almost invariably, there have not been any of those since about 2000 or so. During the height of the Chupacabra panic and hysteria around 1995, 1996 in Puerto Rico, during the height of this, there were autopsies done. And I quote them in the book. And pathologists, in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and elsewhere, who looked at these alleged Chupacabra victims, in fact, determined that there was plenty of blood present. There was nothing at all unusual about them.
Actually, something you do in the book is to make a pretty simple case that a Chupacabra actually physically couldn't suck blood out of an animal.
To be honest with you, when I was doing this investigation, which took me about 5 years, frankly, it's probably my longest running investigation to date, when I was researching this, I kept expecting that somebody had asked these questions. I kept assuming that somebody had gotten off their ass and actually applied some critical thinking and logic to this. Clearly, I was wrong. For example, when you have these canids that appeared around 2004, 2005 in Texas, they're finding these carcasses. And people are claiming these things are Chupacabras. And I'm thinking, well, okay, hold on here. If these are, in fact, the Chupacabras, then there must be very specific mechanisms by which they can suck blood. Because, of course, again, the signature characteristic of a Chupacabra attack is blood loss. And when you look at these animals, particularly there was, I'm going to say about a half dozen that were found. One was found in Blanco, Texas. Another couple were found in Cuero, Texas in 2007 by a rancher named Phyllis Canyon. There was an Elmendorf beast. There were a couple other ones. But when you look at these, and I examined one of the Chupacabra heads, severed head of the Chupacabra for the TV show Monster Quest a couple years back. And if you look at it very closely, there's no way that these dead canids could suck blood. It is physically impossible. And so when I was researching the science side of this for my book, I looked at true vampires, living creatures that we know for a fact exist that do in fact suck blood. And so you look at things like fleas, ticks, lice, assassin bugs, mosquitoes, and of course, the Chupacabra is not an insect, and so you look at the large animals, and so you're looking at things like leeches and lampreys. But of course, the most famous is the vampire bat. And when you look at these true vampires, they have evolved very specific characteristics, certainly in the mouth area. So, for example, if you look at a dog cannot suck blood. It is impossible because in order to actually suck blood, to draw the blood out of a creature, you have to have a mouth structure that allows suction.
Right.
And so some people are saying, well, look at the fangs. Could it suck blood through the fangs? Number one, the fangs aren't hollow. Number two, there are no animals in the world, as far as I know. And if there's a zoologist out there that I've gotten this wrong, please correct me. But to the best of my knowledge, there are no animals in existence that suck through fangs. In fact, there are creatures that inject fluid through fangs, for example, poisonous snakes. But they don't suck blood through the fangs. They don't take it in. And so you look at some of these animals, and it's self-evident to anybody who's taken the time to look at zoology that these things could not be the chupacabras, just by definition. And then the second part of this is that you start looking at if these creatures did suck blood somehow, not only are their mouth structure is wrong, the saliva is wrong. For example, if you look at vampire bats, in vampire bats, the saliva actually has a couple different properties that's very distinctive, and it's evolved specifically for drinking blood. One of them is that the saliva is an anticoagulant. So when it attacks an animal, there are special enzymes in the saliva that keep the blood flowing. And another aspect of the bat saliva, the vampire bat saliva specifically, is that it also has anesthetic properties. So the animal that's having its blood drained doesn't necessarily notice it. In fact, about 10 years ago, I was traveling in the Amazon, and I actually saw firsthand several vampire bat victims. And it was really fascinating to sort of see how the vampire bats would attack these creatures, and oftentimes they wouldn't even know it. And then the second part of this is, what would the creature do once it got the blood anyway? And again, at this point, we turn to forensics. And part of the answer is that the blood is high in iron. And so therefore, animals that do drink blood, hematophagous animals, they've developed specialized digestive features that allow them to digest blood. Because iron has such a high toxicity, animals that don't have these features, in fact, they can get what's called iron toxicity. So drinking blood can actually kill you if you're not adapted for that. And again, in these creatures that have been found, there's been no even mention, no good qualified analysis, no mention of any of these creatures that would lead us to suspect that these could even possibly be the dreaded chupacabra.
You're listening to Skeptically Speaking, and we're talking with author Benjamin Radford. We'll be back to find out how Ben tracked down the real origin of the chupacabra after this.
On the next episode of Skeptically Speaking, we're joined by biologist and author Dr. Karen Bondar to talk about her book, The Nature of Human Nature, Reflections on Our Position as Natural Entities in the Animal Kingdom. The book takes a critical look at some of the things that we think make human beings unique in the animal kingdom. Does our ability to use contraception, or our tendency to eat junk food just for the pleasure, set us apart from our animal cousins? Find out next week on Skeptically Speaking on your local radio station or online at skepticallyspeaking.com.
Welcome back to Skeptically Speaking. I'm your host, Desiree Schell, and I'm talking with Benjamin Radford, writer, editor, investigator, and author of Tracking the Chupacabra, the vampire beast in fact, fiction, and folklore. So now you've actually gotten to see a few of these corpses up close, haven't you?
I have. I've handled them. I've smelled them. And let me tell you.
Smelled them?
You know what? If you can imagine the funk of a chupacabra head, it is similar to, like, if you've ever found like a dog on the highway and you've taken it home and you've cut off its head and you've left it on your back porch. It's sort of like that, but with a little bit of oregano.
That is the most horrible thing I've ever heard. So one of the ones you saw was actually stuffed and mounted?
That was actually one of my favorite ones because it had such an interesting history. It was found by a guy named Lynn Butler, who then traded it to a friend of his by the name of Jerry Eyre, who's a taxidermist in Blanco, Texas. This weird thing, whatever it was, had been attacking his friend's chickens and chasing them around. Apparently he hadn't actually killed any or sucked their blood, but he'd been chasing them around, so it was a bit of a nuisance. So he set out some poison. He found this weird-looking, nearly hairless dog thing. He said, "Hey, Jerry, I found this chupacabra. Do you want to trade it for some taxidermy lessons?" And Jerry's like, "Sure, why not?" So apparently the guy got some taxidermy lessons. I think it was duck taxidermy. Jerry got what became known worldwide as the Blanco chupacabra. And he mounted this thing, and I interviewed Jerry at length. He's a great guy, interesting guy. But my favorite part of this is that he later sold it to a creationist museum. And it was displayed as proof that science is wrong. Scientists don't have all the answers because they say the Chupacabra can't exist, and yet here it clearly is.
And yet.
So you have this fascinating blend of Chupacabra and cryptozoology and creationism wrapped up. And in fact, there's actually a fair amount of that in the Chupacabra folklore that I found. There's actually quite a few links between religious end times folks and the Chupacabra. Some people actually believe that the Chupacabra is mentioned in the Bible as one of the portents of Armageddon.
Well, the real star of your corpse stories was the one found by Texas rancher Phyllis Canyon.
That was actually the most famous Chupacabra in the world. In fact, when Phyllis found this thing, she soon had T-shirts and beer koozies calling it the Summer of the Chupacabra. And she found this thing. And Phyllis is a wonderful woman. I'd interviewed her several times before, and then later on I was asked as part of the TV show Monster Quest to go out and investigate them. So that's when I met her in person and saw her dead head that she keeps in the freezer there. And it was a fascinating story. You know, she's a little spark plug of a woman. She's blonde hair. She has a red visor that she likes to have. She's just an interesting lady, and she's a hunter, and she has traveled widely. And she is convinced that she, in fact, has a Chupacabra. One of the fascinating parts was that she had DNA test results done on it, and it was part of a local TV special. And of course, it was done for Halloween, right? So they actually had this live TV event where they had sent off DNA samples, and they sent off samples, and they got genetics results back. And so live on camera, they revealed, and the Chupacabra is, and there was Phyllis Canyon, and there was Mike Forstner, who was the guy that actually done the sequencing on it. And the reporters like, dun, 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 and it is a coyote. Oh. And you could just look. I saw the video clip, and Phyllis does not look happy about this. And so she like turns and she kind of challenged him. It's like, well, why didn't it look like a coyote? And so she was obviously not happy with this analysis. So she later had her own analysis. She paid to have a second set of samples done, and that also came back coyote, but with a little bit of a twist. That came back coyote with a trace of wolf. It's fascinating talking to her and sort of seeing how her conception of what she found has changed. Last time I talked to her, she admits that she has a coyote, but she also says she has the Chupacabra. That is, she believes that a Chupacabra is a coyote with some wolf in its genetic material. It's an interesting idea, but not really plausible for a variety of reasons, including the fact that we already know what animals that have coyotes and wolf DNA in them look like. They're called coy wolves. They're already known to exist. And the biggest problem, of course, is that they're not vampires.
No, this case, it really illustrates another mistake that seems to be common among the Chupacabra sightings. She described the creature as being completely hairless, despite the fact that it clearly had hair on it. Even after being dead in the freezer for years by that point?
Yes. You know, and again, I like Phyllis. I thank her in the book. I think she's a nice person. I have nothing against her. But I found some very significant and troubling lapses in logic and just in her testimony, because part of the reason that she claimed that it could not be a coyote, number one, she says that she's a rancher and she's been doing this forever and she would know a coyote. Well, that's not necessarily true, and we can talk about that later. The second thing is that she says that she's a naturopathic doctor, and she pronounces it that way, and that she claims that it gives her information that will help discredit genetic testing. Now, I'm not aware that naturopathic doctors have any actual training in interpreting DNA analysis, but that's a separate issue. But yes, she claimed that the reason that the animal that she found could not be a coyote was because it had no hair on it. However, when I looked at it, I photographed it in my book, and there's actually several photographs of it. You can clearly see it has hair. And furthermore, there's one famous photograph that she took of it in 2007, and it's reprinted in the book. And if you look closely at that photograph, it clearly has hair down the ruff. It's probably got 2 feet or so of hair down its spine, which is a distinguishing characteristic of sarcoptic mange. And sarcoptic mange is a skin disease caused by mites that causes the hair to fall out. And one of the characteristics is that it leaves a ruff of hair right along the spine, exactly as you see in Phyllis's Chupacabra.
You're listening to Skeptically Speaking, and I'm talking to Benjamin Radford, author of Tracking the Chupacabra, the Vampire Beast in Fact, fiction and folklore. And we have a question. This is from Janine.
Did anyone ever try to explain how the Chupacabra supposedly spread from Puerto Rico to South America, and then to Mexico and the U.S.? Can it swim, or did they just assume it was already there and just hadn't been discovered until the late 90s?
The answer is that no one really bothered to try and explain that. Again, when I was researching this, I would find these obvious contradictions and questions, and I would assume that somebody somewhere who believes in this would have put forth some plausible explanation for these. And almost invariably, the answer was no. But you're exactly right. What you find is that the Chupacabra is much more closely tied to language than to nationality. The Chupacabra essentially appears only in places where Spanish is spoken. For example, it appears in Texas, where even though the official language of Texas is not Spanish, many people in Texas do speak Spanish. The same thing in Florida and elsewhere. So, but that is one of the puzzling characteristics of it, is that if this is a real animal, essentially everybody agrees that it appeared in 1995 Puerto Rico. I mean, there's really nobody that disputes that. So the question is, well, how did it go elsewhere? How did it show up in Texas and elsewhere, and even in Spain? And what you find is that, well, there's a couple answers. One of them is that it was largely a media-created and media-fueled monster. Between the internet and there was a TV show called Christina, which is basically the Spanish-language version of Oprah. And Christina did a special on the Chupacabra. And almost immediately after that TV special aired, I believe it was in early 96, it was suddenly being reported everywhere. Anywhere where anybody saw the TV show, people were suddenly saying, oh my God, there's a Chupacabra here. And what I find most interesting is that somehow the Chupacabra managed to get to Spain, but it couldn't get to Haiti, which is, I think, only a few hundred miles away. But of course, in Haiti, they speak French.
But you treated this as a legitimate scientific process. You actually organized an expedition to try to find evidence of the Chupacabra in the wild. Because
I was tackling this big mystery that was known, by so many people, it was important that I be very, very thorough in my investigations, as I always try to be. And especially because I was tackling something that was so well known, I was well aware that the believers were going to comb through everything that I said and did and look for holes, as they should. I mean, I certainly invite that. And so I wanted to cover all my bases. And so in doing my research for this, I traveled to Puerto Rico, and I interviewed people in Puerto Rico, including Madeline Tolentino, the original eyewitness from 1995. And she essentially dropped out of sight for a long, long time. And I interviewed her. I went to El Yunque rainforest outside of San Juan, which is allegedly the home and the basically where the Puerto Rico came from, depending on who you talk to. I also went to, of course, to Texas for the TV show. And I also went to Nicaragua. I traveled with two colleagues of mine to the jungles of Nicaragua near the Costa Rican border. And it was, I think, about a 5-day expedition. It was actually cut short because of logistical problems. But, I took this very seriously because, if you're going to do these investigations, you have to take it seriously. The Chupacabra is not a joke. It's not something too stupid to spend time with. It is something that many people really believe exists. And to my mind, if these things do exist, then, and the same thing with ghosts and crop circles made by aliens, whatever else, if these things are real, psychic powers and what have you, if these things actually exist, then they're worthy of analysis. They're not to be ridiculed or mocked. On the other hand, if they don't exist, then the question becomes, well, why are people experiencing things that don't exist? And so, in order for me to really work on doing the field work and actually getting beyond the armchair, I wanted to go and actually investigate the jungles because, in my estimation, that was the most likely place to find an extant population of chupacabras. There's a couple reasons I won't. If you're interested, I'll tell you what they are. But essentially, that was the most likely place I felt in the world, and certainly in Latin America, where you might possibly find chupacabras. So I hired a guide, expert tracker, interviewed him about it, and we actually spent some days in the jungle.
Well, I actually am wondering about that, because if most of the sightings were sort of centered around Texas, why Nicaragua?
The reason is that Nicaragua actually has the most significant chupacabra report in Latin America. And that happened in the year 2000 when a rancher in actually north of Managua, the capital, a place called Mapaiso, basically his animals had been being attacked. And he and a ranch hand waited one night laying in wait for whatever it was that was attacking his animals to attack again. And sure enough, one night he saw these one or two, he's not sure, what he later came to call chupacabras, attacking his livestock, and he shot at it. He later found the bones out on his ranch at a remote site, and he believed that these had been the bones of the creature he'd previously shot. He took them to a local university, assuming, hey, look, I found the chupacabra. I mean, this is, these things were attacking my animals. I shot at it. Here's its bones. And Mr. Talavera believed, certainly at the time, that he was the first person in the world to find a chupacabra carcass, and certainly the bones. Anyway, it later turned out to be a dog, and he later claimed there was conspiracy about it. So that was the most, in Latin America as a whole, the most important sighting occurred, or certainly the most important event occurred in that country. The second reason is that for the chupacabras to exist, for there to be a significant population of them, of course, as with Bigfoot, as with Nessie, as with these other creatures, you have to have a breeding population. We're not just talking about one chupacabra. We're not just talking about one Nessie or one Bigfoot. So there has to be certainly dozens, if not hundreds, and probably thousands. And so where could all these creatures, live and exist and suck blood? And of course, they hadn't been seen for a while. And so because the area that I traveled near the San Juan River was very remote, and it still is to this day, it made sense to me that that would be the most likely place where chupacabras would be stalking animals. The bioreserve that we went to is patrolled. There's restricted access. It's very difficult to get to. It's very remote. And it made sense that would be a place where chupacabras might be attacking creatures and leaving their bloodless carcasses where no one would find them. In addition, as it turns out, I didn't know this until I went there, but apparently the area is actually on the other side of the river is actually used for cattle ranching. So it actually makes sense that if the chupacabras are existing, they would go to nearby areas, attack the cattle, suck the blood out, and go back to the protected bioreserve.
Well, at the risk of sounding picky, the Nicaraguan jungle is large, fairly substantial, really.
Yes.
Is there any chance that over the period of less than 5 days you didn't have the time to explore it all and just maybe didn't miss a dense chupacabra lair, perhaps?
You're exactly right. And that's one of the inherent problems with doing any expedition is whether you're going into the Pacific Northwest woods or wherever you're going, whether you're looking in the Congo for the Mokele Mbembe, whatever the monster is that you're looking for, if you're looking in the Mongolian desert for the Mongolian deathworm or whatever it is, obviously you have finite time and resources here. And so it wasn't just that we went there, we didn't see it, and we went home. I interviewed ranchers and farmers in the area to ask them if they knew of any chupacabra reports. Had they heard of the chupacabra? Was it attacking any animals that they'd seen? And so I assume that because there were farmers and ranchers in the area, if these creatures were existing in that area, they would be seeing the evidence that I wouldn't. Just because I'm there for 5 days and just because I don't see their tracks does not mean that they're not there. Absolutely. The question then becomes, are other people reporting carcasses that have been drained of blood? Are there other reasons why you would expect that these creatures were existing here? And the other part of that is that, it was essentially a preliminary expedition. So if I had found evidence, if I had contacted ranchers and farmers and people in the area who said, oh my God, yes, nobody had asked me about this before, but yes, there was this weird carcass a couple months back that was drained of blood whatever else, then that would be something more to go on. So part of that expedition was looking for further evidence. And so I was looking for, is there any evidence at all that anything is here? And of course, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Right. And that's certainly the case. But unfortunately, there was no evidence at all. Not only did the park guide, who'd been there for 10 years, I believe, not only did he not know of it, but no one in the area did either. And so it wasn't just a romp through the jungle. Okay, now here's my favorite part. The centerpiece of your book. I would think the pretty definitive explanation of the real origin of the Chupacabra legend. So you managed to trace the story back. Tell us about that. Yeah, it was interesting because, again, once I recognized that there were these two distinctive and completely different types of chupacabras, then the question is, well, what are these things? And I sort of solved the mystery in reverse because the easiest ones, frankly, were the type 2 chupacabras, the second kind that emerged right around 2004, 2005, because we had carcasses. We have alleged chupacabra bodies. When we have bodies, we can do tests. And so that's when the DNA test came back. And one by one, each of these chupacabras was identified and recognized and categorized. as essentially non-chupacabras. So that part of the mystery was actually kind of solved fairly early on. But what the nagging part was, the key to the puzzle, the key to the mystery was that had certainly existed since 1995, so at this point for 15, 16 years, was where did the chupacabra come from? Everybody was looking for this 3 to 5 foot tall, bipedal, spiky backed, alien type eyes. This, what the hell? Where did this come from? And so that was really the key to my mind, and that was the final piece of the puzzle. I'd already looked into the forensics, I'd already looked into the carcasses, I'd looked into the folklore behind it, I'd looked into the fictional aspects of it, but the final missing piece was this. And so I was trying to figure out where in the world could this original eyewitness have seen it. And so I looked in everything from media depictions and news stories and just where in the world, and finally I found out where the chupacabra came from. As it turns out, the original eyewitness saw a movie called Species. It was a 1995 film starring a Canadian by the name of Natasha Henstridge, tall, blonde supermodel type. I think she actually was a model. That's in her, of course, more comely form. In her less comely form, she has this alien creature, this alien visage, that is this tall, spiky-backed, alien-type animal. And that creature, in turn, was designed by H.R. Giger, the Swiss surrealist artist. And he'd done, of course, the art for Aliens. In fact, he won an Academy Award for his creature design in the movie Alien. And he's the one that designed the creature called Syl in the film. And when I compared the creature in the Species film to the chupacabra, all these similarities just jumped out at me. And they just, one after another, they both have spikes down the back. They both have alien wraparound eyes. They both have smaller nose, almost missing ears, just over and over and over again. And in fact, what really cemented it for me was that if you look at the origin story for the chupacabra, there's basically two different origin stories why people think the chupacabra emerged in 1995. You have to remember that because it didn't pre-exist, people had to come up with some reason why an animal would suddenly appear out of nowhere.
Right.
Because giraffes didn't suddenly appear in 1972 in Baltimore. It just doesn't work that way. That's not how that works. And so people were trying to figure out what the hell's going on here. And the answer was there were two different answers. One was that the chupacabra was the results of genetics experiments, top secret genetics experiments done by the U.S. government.
Of course.
Sort of a Frankenstein gone awry type scenario, of course. The second theory regarding the origin of the chupacabra was that it was an extraterrestrial. It was either an extraterrestrial itself, or some people thought it was an alien's pet, basically, that UFOs had come down to Puerto Rico and they let the dog out and they couldn't come back. And I don't know, just an alien creature escaped was the other version. And when I read that again and I looked more closely at the film, and to be honest, I hadn't seen the film. I had to go back and look at the film. And I also got the press notes, and I actually interviewed a person that worked on that film. The origin story for the creature Syl in the movie Species is that it is both an extraterrestrial alien and the result of top secret U.S. government genetics experiments. It could not be. I mean, the origin stories are identical. On top of that, I interviewed Mrs. Tolentino, the original eyewitness, and she told me point blank that she had, in fact, seen the movie Species. And I also managed to dig up a 1996 interview with her that I didn't conduct. Somebody else did that. And in there, she says, for a fact, that she saw the movie Species. And number two, that the creature the similarity was remarkable. I mean, so here you have the original eyewitness herself, in her own words, saying, yeah, that chupacabra I saw, it looked a lot like that monster in the movie Species.
And there were all kinds of details in her story that changed over the years, correct?
Yes, yeah. There was all sorts of stuff. She originally said that she was sleeping and her mother woke her up. And she said, oh, my God, there's something outside. And she looked outside the window and she saw this creature that she described. Again, the 3 to 5 feet tall, alien-type eyes, head, the spikes on the back. And that it sort of leaped and then it jumped across the road and into the bushes and it was gone. Originally, however, if you look at her original accounts, including that 1996 interview that I mentioned, she says, that, for example, that there was a man in the street who had seen it originally and was there at the time. She also claimed that there was a teenage boy or a young boy who had actually chased the chupacabra into a nearby field, grabbed it, pried its mouth open, looked at its teeth, smelled its breath, I don't know, let it go, and then the chupacabra went away. So when I interviewed her later on in the year 2010, None of these details, certainly the kid, doing the dental inspection on Chupacabra, emerge. And so the question that comes down to is, what did she see? And the honest answer is, I don't know what she saw. I have no idea what Madeline Tolentino saw that day in August of 1995. All I can tell you is that the thing that she saw that later became known worldwide as the Chupacabra came directly from this science fiction film. So did she make it up? Was she hallucinating? I don't know. I believe that she's a sincere person. I don't think she's a liar. I don't think she's a hoaxer. I think that she simply confused something that she saw in a film with real life and unwittingly spawned the world's third best known, or second best known, depending on the Google search, monster in the world.
So is that it for the Chupacabra then? Is it done?
It's done as far as I'm concerned. I spent 5 years on this, and I believe that I've solved the mystery. If other people doubt it, all I would ask is, read the book or read what I've written about it and come to your own conclusion about it. If I've missed something, if I've missed an important part, then I'm certainly happy to reopen the case. But ultimately, nothing that I write, nothing I say is going to put this to bed. There will always be people who will see things that they don't understand and things they can't explain. And if they happen to be in Spanish-speaking areas, so they happen to be in Puerto Rico, for example, they are likely to continue calling it the Chupacabra. Again, this sort of goes back to what I was talking about before, is that originally, in 1995, 1996, the word Chupacabra meant a very, very specific creature, entity with very specific characteristics. Over the past 16 years, the word Chupacabra has come to mean anything weird. And people will continue finding anything weird. And so that part of it is not going to go away. In my book, in fact, in one of my appendices, I put it in there as Appendix 2. It's called How to Identify a Chupacabra. And I have 10 different characteristics of Chupacabras that if in the future, if tomorrow or next month or next year or 10 years from now, somebody finds a Chupacabra or something that they believe is a Chupacabra, they can buy my book, go to Appendix 2 and see, is it possible that this creature that they found is in fact a Chupacabra? And I would suggest that if it can't pass at least 7 or 8 of the 10 characteristics, it probably ain't a Chupacabra.
And one last quick question from Stuart.
So you've done lake monsters and Chupacabra. Are you going to tackle Bigfoot and get the hat trick?
I've written about Bigfoot. To be honest with you, I don't think that either Bigfoot or Nessie is solvable as a whole, just because there is so much out there. Especially when you're talking about Bigfoot, there's so many different tracks and disputed tracks and films and hoax films and eyewitnesses and so much. There's so much out there. And so I believe that the reason that I was able to, in my mind, definitively solve the Chupacabra was because it was a relatively recent creature. The evidence that I had to analyze and sort through and process was only 15 years old at this point. To be honest with you, I don't think that I could ever definitively say that I have solved Bigfoot. It's just there's just too much there. There's too many different aspects to it. I've certainly tackled specific Bigfoot cases, and I will continue to do so. But I'll leave Bigfoot for somebody who has more time on their hands.
And speaking of time, we are out. Thanks very much for being here, Ben.
Thanks. It was great to talk to you.
You can find out more about Ben's work and his other books at radfordbooks.com or by clicking the link on our website at skepticallyspeaking.com. While you're there, click the links to Twitter, to Facebook, and to iTunes, where you can listen to past episodes, subscribe to the show, or leave a review. And on our episodes page, you'll find our previous interview with Ben about his book, Scientific Paranormal Investigation. That's episode 66. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week on Skeptically Speaking.
Bring it on, the skeptics await your letter. Your call, tweet, homing, pigeon, whatever. Desiree Shell, gonna raise a little hell, break the spell of Pavlov's spells. Cause we're skeptically speaking, our mind reading tarot cards and witches, psychics, and their spoon-bending mind tricks. All the humbug, flim-flam, frauds and shams, the charlatan woo. I don't think you understand, it's the hocus pocus, out of focus locus, eroding the brain, making gains on the hopeless. Let the crystal ball fall, smash on the floor, leave the pieces alone, we don't need them anymore. Just a microscope, telescope, magnifier, reading in between the lines of these lies. Bring it on, the skeptics await your letter. Your call, tweet, homing, pigeon, whatever. Desiree Shell, gonna raise a little hell, metaphorically that is. Cause we're skeptics. Skeptically Speaking.
Skeptically Speaking is produced with the support of CJSR 88.5 FM in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Our studio assistants are Brent Kelly and Rochelle Saunders. Ryan Bromsgrove is our studio technician and research assistant. The show is produced and edited by K.O. Myers. Our theme song was written and recorded by AOK. And I'm your host, Desiree Schell.